schemes to optimize the throughput of random access communications that are the basis of the well-known MAC and random access protocols. Then, working at the University of Paris-Descartes and Duke University, he developed a new product formed queuing networks with negative customers and triggers known as Gelembe networks or G networks, showing how to mathematically evaluate the performance of ICT systems that incorporate important control functions. He also introduced a new spiked stochastic neural networks model known as random neural networks. In our team, in INRIA, we have an intensive usage of this tool in different types of applications, for example, to assess the quality of experience. Erol Gelembe currently works on the interaction between energy consumptions and quality of service in ICT and on improving security in networks. He has graduated over than 75 PhD students and mentored numerous postdoctoral fellows. In 2017, he was awarded the Mustafa Prize for Information Sciences and Technologies. Thanks, Erol, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. I will not use this microphone, so I'm fine. Well, there was this very long historical introduction, which was interesting, that Michele gave us, and which is very appropriate for Rome. But he had a very strange choice of dates. So he talked about the Roman period, then he jumped into the 7th and 8th century with the Arab invasions, and then he jumped into the 19th century, the end of the 19th century, with European colonialism in North Africa. And so he left out a lot of important things. And I'd just like to mention a couple of things. I'm an amateur historian. One very important thing he left out was about Tariq. Okay, you mentioned Carthage, etc., but that's very old stuff, and no one can check it. But if you look at his surname, it is Bejawi. Now, Bejawi refers to the city of Béjaïa, which is currently in Algeria. It's a very important city historically for Italy, and I will tell you why. Okay? First of all, let me mention something. Béjaïa was an important trading port in the Middle Ages. Very important trading port, and it was a producer of wax, bees and wax. Why were bees and wax important? Bees were important generally. Wax, of course, honey is very important, but wax was very important because you built candles with it, right? So bougie in French comes from Béjaïa. The word bougie comes from Béjaïa. And because it was an important trading port at that time, who was hanging around that place? Italians, of course, of the marine republics of Italy, of the Italy of that time, in particular Pisa. So who worked there? Well, the father of Fibonacci. Or actually, Bonaccio was working there because Fibonacci refers to the son of Bonaccio. So he was, the father of Fibonacci was working there, and Fibonacci studied mathematics there at the knee of the Arab mathematicians that were active in that city. Why were there Arab mathematicians in Béjaïa? Because there was trade. Where there is trade, you have to count, you have to write, you have to report, you have to exchange money. So these mathematicians were there because there was a use for them. Right? It's very interesting. All of this is very interesting. So that's one point that Michele forgot. And Fibonacci, Béjaïa, Tariq, okay? Which I noticed. I noticed as I was sitting in the back as a missing thing. Another thing that he missed, a couple of other things he missed. One thing he missed is that, he talked North Africa, then he talked Italy, okay? But there are important bridges. For instance, the Kingdom of Naples, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, the Kingdom of Naples was very active in the commerce with North Africa and with the Ottoman Empire. Today, not today, but at Christmas, if you go to Naples, you will see I presepi. These are Christmas representations in the churches in Naples. In these Christmas representations, there are always I turchi, and that's where I come in. Okay? So there are, and this guy here. So there are I turchi, basically janissaries and various attractive ladies are in the presepi, representing the Turkish exchanges that were happening with the Kingdom of Naples. Okay? But in addition to that, don't forget the Ottomans were both a European, Asian, and North African power, because Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, and of course all of the Middle East that we know today, all the way to the Hungarian border, was the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottoman Empire was using this multicultural relationship. You know, people don't know this, but a lot of prime ministers, grand viziers, Turkish grand viziers were Serbian. A lot of pashas were Hungarian, including some pashas from my family. So there was a lot of this European, Asian, North African exchange, which lasted 6 centuries. So in the modern empires, it was the longest lasting modern empire. 6 centuries, a very, very important long period of time. Let me say, much shorter and much more successful than European colonialism, which only lasted perhaps 50, 60, at maximum 100 years in the same region. Okay? Another thing I like to say, and I hope I will not offend my Algerian friends, is that the French had to put an army of perhaps 200, 300,000 people to keep Algeria, to try to keep Algeria. The Ottomans kept Algeria with 1,000 janissaries only. 1,000 janissaries were all that the Ottomans had in Algeria, because they collaborated with the population. They were not antagonizing with them. They collaborated both with the Muslim and the Jewish and the Christian population of Algeria, the Ottomans. That was a different philosophy of ruling a country. It wasn't based on we and they. It was based on us. So having said that, I move on to the subject of my, the subject of my lecture. But I couldn't avoid saying this because, you know, it was such an interesting cultural introduction to Rome and to many of the links that we have across the world. Okay, so the talk is about energy and quality of service. And it's interesting that we have developed information technology and telecommunications and signal processing for a long time without considerations for the energy issue. Okay, we thought that energy is free and we can do faster, better, etc., without thinking about what the impact is on the energy, right? And there was the wake-up call actually came in 2012. And the wake-up call did not come from the academic community or from conventional industry. It came from the Gartner Group. In the Gartner Group, in 2010, I think approximately, published a report saying we're seeing that energy is becoming a dominant factor in information technology, and that it is increasing, okay? So that's the starting point for my presentation, and I'd just like to say a little bit about that. A lot of my research projects since then have involved energy. My work is funded either by the UK EPSRC currently, or by the UK Ministry of Defence, or by the European Union. So I have those kinds of funding, and in a lot of my projects, my funded projects, including one that I have now, we deal with this question of energy and quality of service because of the importance of the subject. So let me say a little bit about where this all comes from, okay? And here is a picture of, if you wish, you don't see the electrons going around and carrying energy here, but this is the energy picture for information technology globally, okay? Of course, when we have energy consumption, okay, we will have some CO2 impact, okay? This is very clear to you. When you fly a plane, it's consuming energy, which is fossil energy, and this energy is burning, is created through burning of fossil fuel, okay? And what happens immediately, CO2 and CO go out into the atmosphere and other things as well, okay? So you have a link between, so that's why this slide has both the energy considerations and the CO2 issues that appear, Okay? So this picture, what does it say? It's an approximate estimate. Okay? It's very difficult to get precise data unless you look at very precise sectors and very precise instances. But this is a picture that says that the energy consumption of ICT is 1/4 of that is for telecommunications infrastructure. Okay? Just feel good, your mobile phones are a very small fraction of things today. They represent perhaps 1% or less of energy consumption by ICT. Okay? So the mobile phones themselves are not that important. The IoT is a different story. As it comes on board, that's going to be a different story. But the telecoms infrastructure is a huge consumer. Okay? And where is the consumption? In the base stations that you see up there. The base stations consume a lot of energy. Okay? You have significant energy consumption in the routers. The routers consume a lot of energy. You have a lot of energy consumption in the drivers that take the data from the base stations or from the routers and drive it into fiber optics links. A lot of energy consumption there. So all these things, the telecommunications infrastructure has a 25% effect. And you can think of it more or less as something that will not go away. Okay? It will not go away. It's a bit like the VAT, value-added tax. It will not go away, and whatever you do in information technology, there's going to be communications. Okay? And 25% of energy consumption is going to be in there. Okay? Then you have data centers. And data centers, interestingly enough, people talk a lot about energy consumption in data centers, but interestingly enough, it's not that bad. I mean, it's bad, it's about another 20%, but it's not that bad, because that's a place where you can optimize a lot. Okay, you can do a lot of energy savings by very clever handling, clever cooling, and so on. And that's why, because each data center is itself a large consumer of energy. So for instance, you run a data center, you may be paying 2 or 3 million euros of an electricity bill. Okay? Your electricity bill in a data center is often higher than your staff personnel bill. So what you do is you optimize that, because if you save 10% or 5% of that bill, it's a lot of money. It's significant money. It can make the difference between profit and loss. So there's been a lot of effort in optimization in that area. It's harder in the telecoms infrastructure because it's so dispersed. It's so dispersed, and also because the renewal of the infrastructure is slow. You change some base stations here, some base stations here, a router here, a router there, but there is no overall look. So for instance, BT has an electricity bill which is larger in the UK. I'm not talking of BT worldwide. BT in the UK has an electricity bill which is larger than £1 billion. Okay, so on BT's balance sheets, it's a huge thing. But it cannot do too much about it because it's so much dispersed equipment and wires and all kinds of things. Okay? And the third area is all the rest. That's where you and I are sitting. Okay? All our desktop machines, our servers, our backups, our small servers in our labs, our small servers in our offices, the servers in your companies, and all the other stuff is there, which accounts for more than 50. Now, this picture doesn't include the effect of entertainment. Okay? Then you have all the gaming industry, which is a huge consumer of energy, because they have servers and things. Sony doesn't like to talk about it. They have a huge consumption of energy. Okay? And you have the video on demand. You have all the stuff which is related to entertainment, which does not come into this picture, which is not listed here. Okay? Now, what do we know? What we know is that there is a relationship between electricity consumed and CO2 impact. Okay? I say CO2, I don't say CO. Assume perfect combustion and so on. Now, let me ask you the following question. If you burn 1 liter of petrol, how many grams of CO2 will you generate? No one has any idea. Okay. Is it less than a kilo or more than a kilo? More, yeah. Basically because there's the O2, right? So because you're adding C is in the petrol, but O2 comes from the air. So basically it's 2.5 approximately, okay? So you have 1 liter of petrol burnt directly will lead to 2.5 kilograms of CO2 out in the air, okay? So there is this relationship. And typically if you take a world average, 1 kilowatt hour of electricity, world average, maps of, I say world average because you have nuclear, which does not have a CO2 impact, not significant. You have wind, you have this, you have that, you have the other. But the average impact, CO2 impact of 1 kilowatt hour is 400 grams. Okay, that is a lot. Okay? So you should feel very guilty every time you consume 1 kilowatt hour in your computer. Think about it and think about the 400 grams of CO2 that you release. Okay, so it's a big, big problem. And of course, if you look inside Europe, which is the country which has the lowest CO2 impact in its electricity is? Any other bad ideas? Any ideas? Some people say, oh, it's Germany because they put a lot of wind power. It's France. Okay, it's France simply because France is under 100 grams. It's of the order of 70 simply because of nuclear power. Okay, the domination of nuclear. They also have hydroelectric in France and they also have wind. But the main thing is that the nuclear power is great for CO2 impact. It has a very low CO2 impact. Anyway, so these things are interesting to see. And what's also interesting to see in this picture, I say aviation, ICT has surpassed aviation in CO2 impact. Okay? And a way to think about ourselves, take all of the German economy, take Germany, and take Japan, okay? And take their electricity consumption, total electricity consumption, Germany and Japan. ICT equals Germany and Japan in electricity consumption. Okay, so we're really talking about very significant, two major industrial. I'm not saying China because then I'd be in real trouble. Where it's a different scale, but electricity for ICT equals roughly Germany plus Japan's electricity for everything, which is important to know. Okay, so let's move on a little bit. These are old figures. Old figures, but they're interesting. They tell you how this thing is growing, okay? It's growing slowly, but it's growing definitely. Okay? And once in a while, you'll see certain countries where this growth will stop for some time. There's the case of Sweden. I think 3-4 years ago, they renewed all of their telecommunications infrastructure. Okay? They renewed their telecommunications infrastructure. It's a country with a very old telecoms infrastructure. They were kind of the inventors of telephone. They were at the beginning, at least, of telephony, right? And those of you who know queuing theory, which was developed through telephony, realize that a lot of the early work was done by Swedish people. Palm, Erlang, and so on. Very early work was done by Swedish people. So, and I don't know why they're whistling at me. It must be because I'm very attractive. But what Sweden did was they changed from copper, essentially. They changed from copper to fiber. Okay? Changing from copper to fiber, they dropped their energy consumption for telecoms. However, as they did that, they didn't show another factor, which is how much building happened at that time. They had to have all of these big machines dig big holes, okay, consuming diesel, digging holes and building stuff with, and so on. So their reduction has already been offset by construction costs. So you have to realize that there are these interesting trade-offs. Nothing comes for free. It's not because now you're using fiber that you didn't use a tremendous amount of petrol or diesel to make all the construction work, and you didn't create cement and building and so on and dig under streets and all that stuff, okay? But anyway, there's this constant growth, and it's good to remember. And again, you have on the right-hand side the way this is distributed, okay? So these are interesting considerations. And this is the slide that actually details what I told you about Japan and Germany. Okay, it just gives you the numbers. I'll leave the slides with you so you will be able to, anyone interested can have a look at what's going on. And you also have the numbers, okay? World's electricity consumption, this may be a year late in terms of numbers. It may be a bit higher now, I don't know. But it was, number of terawatt hours per year. And the part which is China is there, 5,000 terawatts hour per year. And then you have the other pieces of information for ICT 2016. Electricity for Japan and Germany is the same thing as ICT, okay? And that's about 1,600 terawatt hours per year. So anyway, so you have these numbers, and they correspond to actual fact. Is this acceptable? Well, it is a significant economic cost for telecoms companies. For all telecoms companies, electricity consumption is a very significant fact. So whatever they can do to optimize, to reduce, is going to be important. It's a significant economic fact for data centers. Anyone running a data center has that problem. The UK is building the Hinkley Point power plant with Chinese money and French technology. Very British approach, okay? Get someone else to pay it and someone else to do it. It's well-known technique in the UK. Well, what's happening there is that Hinkley Point is just going to cover the ICT needs of the UK. It's going to be under, because it's always working for the past, it's going to cover roughly the 10% of UK electricity consumption, which corresponds to ICT, okay? Of course, the financial industry uses a lot of data centers, a lot of workstations, and they are huge consumers of electricity for ICT. All right? So what can we do? Okay, that's great. We've seen this. There's a problem. Are there scientific methods to deal with this? And some years ago, a lot of universities agglomerated around a project called Green Touch, which was launched by AT&T. So there was an effort to see what could be done. Basically, this project has disappeared. They announced objectives. We never know. We don't know whether these objectives were ever realized or not. They said, we can do this, we can do that, we can do the other things, and then they closed the project. So that is not an ongoing project. It was something that was tried, and probably some interesting ideas came out, but what was the impact? We don't know, okay? So what are the ways forward? I mean, what can we do to mitigate this effect? I mean, clearly, there is one way to reduce energy consumption by ICT drastically. What? Turn all the computers, all the mobile phones, turn 5G, turn everything off, okay? And then you have no energy consumption, but we don't want to do that because we need it. So it's always going to be a compromise between the quality of service that you want to achieve and the energy that you consume. As engineers, we're used to compromises. We don't have a pure, perfect world. We always look at compromises. And incidentally, 5G is going to make things worse, not better. Why worse? Because there's a densification of transmitters. Okay? There's going to be a large densification of transmitters, and also there are going to be, multiple beams being used by the single device with choices, dynamics. So the sense people have of this is that initially, anyway, this is going to make it worse. Okay, this problem is going to become worse for telecoms. But anyway, how can we make things better? Okay, how can we mitigate this? Now, the first point I have there is share the infrastructure. Now, share the infrastructure goes against all the deregulation of telecommunications. The deregulation of telecommunications was everyone for his own. Okay, every telecom company has its base stations, every telecom company has its routers, every telecom company has its fiber going from the base station to the router, and so on. So we have been living through a period where the deregulation in the economic and in the regulatory sense, in the legal sense, has led to a substantial duplication and increase. Why duplication? Because every telecom company has service obligations. They can't say, we turn things off and so on. They have to be 24 hours there. because they have service obligations. Anyone trying to reach emergency services or some other services has to be able to connect at any time, anywhere. Okay? So because of that, we have not shared the infrastructure, and things have gotten worse. There is one country that I'm aware of where there's an interesting attempt to share the infrastructure, and that is China. Okay? So China has 4 operators, I think, perhaps 5 or 6 now, but certainly I'm aware of 4 major operators in China. And now they have a joint company for managing and installing the infrastructure. This is a way ahead, okay, because you're going to share the hardware and manage things through software, right? So that's the idea. So sharing the infrastructure is a first step ahead. And of course, European governments in particular, and American governments, and all liberal governments, have not had an interest in this, because every time they sell bandwidth, they get a huge chunk of money, and they close their tax they have a découvert. They've spent more than they've been spending more than they have as money, and they use that as a cash cow, okay, to solve a lot of problems. So share the infrastructure, consolidate hardware infrastructure. It's the same thing, basically. Then a lot of things have been happening. And this is an area where computer scientists have been very guilty. If you look at my laptop or yours, there's a tremendous amount of useless software sitting there that you and I never use, okay? Take this, take that, put this, put that, and so on. What is it doing? Every time the computer starts, it checks if all of this software is working, okay? And exercising systems all the time. And this software is talking to the similar software somewhere else, from which it's going to get an eventual upgrade or something. So there's a lot of nonsense going on, which has been pushed by the software industry. And that is increasing our energy consumption. So as much as possible, it would be great to be able to recognize on a machine, after a user has been using it for, I don't know, 6 months, move things which are not essential, move them away. And don't waste energy on stuff that no one wants, that you don't really want. And if you really want it, then you can call it later and make use of it, okay? Then the other thing is operate at optimum load, speed, and power. And I'll show you some technical results on that. Then route traffic to minimize energy. People don't know this, but the energy consumption, and I always use the word energy because energy is what we pay for, and energy is what creates CO2 impact. It's not watts that does it. It's watt hours that do it, okay? So I always use the term energy. Route traffic to minimize energy. And you can do this because networks have components which are nonlinear. Their power versus, their load versus power relationship is nonlinear. I'll show you some examples of our measurements, okay? Then do energy-aware task allocation in the cloud. This is something that we've done and we've demonstrated. You can get a lot of improvement that way, and this is in an early piece of work we did with HP labs in Italy. We showed how that could be done. Do, of course, something which is well known and which a lot of systems do, dynamically sleep and wake. Okay? Dynamically sleep and wake. That sounds a great idea. You go to sleep and you wake, and that's fine. But the problem with this is when you go to sleep, you consume a lot of energy, and when you wake up, I'm talking about computer equipment, but human beings too, probably. So when we go to sleep, you use energy to go to sleep, and to wake up, you use energy to wake up. So these things can be done, but they have to be done cleverly so that you don't end up consuming more than less. Okay? Then try to use renewable scavenged energy. And the final point is radically change technology. Okay? What do I mean by radically change? Quantum. Okay, see if at the quantum level you can really improve your energy consumption. All right? And my talk will cover, actually very briefly, of course, many of these points in a technical way, okay, from now on. But I think it was important to give a setting for this. Okay? Let me move on a little bit now, down the line. Okay? Let me talk to you about wireless. And a lot of you will resonate with this. But this kind of work is not done sufficiently, I think. So what happens? If you take a wireless, say, transmitter or transceiver, what do you have? You have a processor, okay, analog or digital, a little bit analog, a lot digital these days, perhaps in the future, much analog, less digital, who knows? You have a processor and you have a transmitter or a transceiver, okay? The transmitter, of course, uses more energy than the receiver, obviously. So you have this system and you have an energy source, for instance, a battery. So you have that, and what you are interested in when you talk about energy is the number of bits that you correctly transmit. Correctly in the sense that the receiver has correctly received them. Okay? The number of bits that you correctly transmit per energy unit. Okay? So per watt, how many bits do you manage, or per nanowatt, how many bits do you manage to transmit correctly? Okay? That's the issue. So what you look at is the effective transmission time, D, is the duration. Why are you interested in durations? Because we are interested in watt hours. We're not interested in watts. Okay, so for instance, you have a transmitter that is transmitting at 1 watt. If it's transmitting for a longer time, of course, the energy consumed is larger. Okay? So we're looking at the effective transmission time of a packet or some unit of data. Okay? And this effective transmission time is going to be equal to the unit's transmission time, okay, nominal speed of the transmission system, the nominal transmission time, divided by the probability of error. Okay? This formula is kind of very easy to derive. This gives you, okay, so in the denominator, this F quantity, the probability of correct transmission. This F quantity depends on what? In the numerator, very simple formula, in the numerator, you have the transmission power, okay, multiplied by some constant. And in the denominator, you have the noise power, and you have the interference power, okay? Now, the interference noise is something you cannot suppress, okay, or that you can't characterize, perhaps, sufficiently well. The interference is all the other people like you, okay? So the more people that you put, the more base stations you put, you're going to have more interference. So you have this interesting relationship. And there's also a further interesting relationship, okay, which is seen in the curve down there. And what you see is the energy efficiency of transmission. The energy efficiency is going to be maximized, okay, at a certain power level. Why? Because suppose everyone is the same. Everyone is talking at the same power level, right? What happens? Everyone is interfering with each other. So if I raise my voice, everyone else raises their voice. And if I'm not careful, things get worse, not better, okay? So there's going to be an optimum power level so that your efficiency is greatest, okay? Efficiency is bits transmitted per energy, or energy consumed per number of bits, right? Which you want to maximize, so which you want to minimize. So you have relations like that, which I won't go into the details, but this is published work. So you can look at that as one of the interesting questions. How should I manage my power at different transmitters, for instance, in a 5G system, so that actually I have overall the lowest energy consumption per bit, okay? Fundamental question, which I think should can still involve many PhD dissertations and many papers for people interested in this. I won't go through this. There's a lot of analysis involved, but it's interesting stuff. Now, the problem is not just what I said. It's not just the transmission power or the electronics power that we have to look at in these simple terms, but you also have to look at the storage energy consumption, okay? Why? Because if you have bigger memories, memories typically consume some energy. Okay? Bigger memories at the transmitters means more energy consumption. Furthermore, having a bigger queue of packets to transmit means more managing the queue, okay, depending on what algorithms that you're going to use. It means that your electronics that is processing the Q is going to be spending more time as you put a bigger buffer, okay? So you also have to look at those things, and this can also be represented mathematically and analyzed, okay? We're going very quickly, but this is also an interesting question, okay? Let's talk a little bit about computer systems. In a computer system, what would you, or even a processor, a digital processor, what would you like ideally? Ideally, you would like to have a load-dependent, strictly linear, load-dependent power consumption. Zero load, zero power. Something else, higher load, linear increase. This is what you'd like. And of course, then you're going to have some saturation because you can't kind of increase the load indefinitely. Okay, every machine has its limit. So if you do that, then the energy consumption per job is what? It's the power consumption, which is there, power, function of the load and some proportionality constant, divided by the arrival rate of jobs. Why? Because power is energy per unit time. Arrival rate is jobs per unit time. Okay? You divide energy per unit time by jobs per unit time, you get energy per job, right? So we're interested in energy per job, and it has this very simple formula where expectation of S is the average service time of a job. People doing queuing theory will recognize this more easily than others, but so what you see here is that the energy per job in an ideal situation is going to be proportional to the execution time of the job, okay? And independent of other things. So you're going to have this thing. Now, reality is different. Reality is different. I skipped the slide where I was showing you this, but reality is much more like power equals some constant plus a linear component depending on load. Why? Because if you have no load, you still have power consumption in a system. Okay, the systems which don't consume power, if they're on, and there are no jobs, I mean, they still have to be there, active, waiting for a job to arrive. So you're going to have something like A plus B of R, and in that case, you see that the energy per job is A over lambda plus B expectation of S. Okay? Now, this formula on the right-hand side, which is a very modest formula, it explains to you why we have always concentrated computation from multiple sources on some unique device, okay? It's like the data center justification formula. Why? Because A is a constant, B is a constant, right? Lambda is the load. So if you increase the load, A over lambda tends to 0, okay? So you're tending to the ideal. So this is tending to the ideal when the load becomes high. This just tells you if you have a higher load, you're going to be more energy efficient. Okay? Interesting, very simple observation. Now, if you look at routers, for instance, you will see all kinds of interesting characteristics. But let me go a little bit further, okay, and say, well, we said initially, I mean, of course, we're interested in energy, but we're interested in quality of service as well. So how do we compromise between the two? Well, you can compromise between the two mathematically. Okay? You're going to have a cost function per job. When I say job, you can think of it per packet. You can think of it per task executed. You can think of it per bit, whatever. So you have a job to do there, and you're looking at two different things. First of all, small b multiplied by j job. J job is the energy consumed to execute a job. Okay? And b is a proportionality factor in this cost function. And the first term, A, is another proportionality factor. It gives you, using elementary queuing theory, it gives you the average response time of the job. So your quality of service is average response time, and I want some average response time to be good, but I also want my energy to be small. So I have to compromise between the two. If you develop this formula, you see that, okay, it becomes that. And what do you see? Well, you can actually measure. This is a curve where we have measured average response time as a function of load, okay? So the blue line, the light blue line, is the ideal from the formula, the little triangles in blue are measurements. Now, you have here energy per job versus load. And here you have the ideal formula and the measurement, the measurements taken on the processor, okay, for that. And if you look at the one question you can ask is, what is my optimum operating point? What load should I have on the system so that my system is operating for any small a, small b, which are how much importance I give to quality of service and to energy. How can I choose my operating point? And this is the formula for the optimum operating point. Okay? This value of your operating point gives you the minimum of that cost function, which includes energy and quality of service. All right? Now, that's kind of interesting. And you can go on and say, well, let's see if experiments tell me that this is true. And if I look at the experiments, they show me, basically, you can compute from the parameters of the system, you can compute the optimum operating point. They're shown there as rho star up there. And then down here, you have the measurements, okay, for these cost functions on an experimental test bed, and you have the ideal formulas plotted as solid lines. So comparison of theory and experimental data shows that these formulas have a meaning experimentally. Okay? The other question then is the first question I asked. I looked at the first question I asked you was how much power should we use if we want to optimize energy consumption in a multi-user communication system, remember? The second question that I asked was what should be the load on a server so that I minimize a compromise between energy consumption and quality of service. Okay? This question is, suppose I have my mobile device here, okay, and I'm sending requests to various data servers. Okay, I'm trying to find out something through Google, and I have an app which selects the server I'm going to use so that I have a best compromise between energy and quality of service. This is the question I'm addressing here, right? And so it's a matter of choosing the probabilities of sending it to the different ones. And what do I have? I still have my small a, my small b, but I have multiple servers. And the load on the multiple servers will depend on this probability that I've selected, because I have a general flow of requests, and then I have to dispatch this flow of requests. There's me, but there are many people like me, okay? And these probabilities are chosen as a function of all of the users. So all of the users are trying to do this optimization unknowingly. They don't know about it. And they use information about the battery of servers, the massive number of servers that they're exploiting. Okay? So this thing tells you how to choose the optimum load sharing among many servers so that you're maximizing, you're minimizing this cost function that involves energy and quality of service. And you see a formula which is, interestingly enough, easy to interpret. You have various terms. For instance, sigma I is the relative speed of a server with respect to the other. Then the beta BIs are the relative energy parameters, okay? Because you have AI and BI, which are the energy parameters in the formula for energy consumption per job. So you have all of those things, and they come into the formula, and then you can decide how this should be shared optimally. Okay? So for instance, you may have similar problems when you're dealing with satellite payloads, right? Because you're dealing with a lot of satellites. They have different processing capacities. They have different energy considerations, different energy profiles. And if I'm going to use them so that I maximize some kind of criterion, I want the users to be happy, end users to be happy, but I also want the system as a whole to live as long as possible in terms of energy. Okay? So how do I manage this? It's exactly the same problem that could use these ideas, this approach. All right? So lots of interesting problems like that. And we can go on. We talked about on-off systems. Now, in on-off systems, the energy per job, or rather the criteria, the performance criteria per job, would have something like this form. Large F, when you turn a system on and off, you have a duty cycle, right? And large F is the proportion of time when the system is up. Okay? Small f is, on the other hand, how fast you turn it on and off. I mean, you can have a certain value of large f, and you can have many different values of small f to achieve the same large f. Okay? So large f and small f come into the picture. And in this picture, there are all kinds of things that enter. For instance, gamma that you see there is the overhead associated. Gamma is the energy overhead associated with switching on and off, right? And so on. So you have all these things coming into the picture. Again, you can get the optimum operating point, okay, for the system in this form. It's kind of useful to have some sense of how you should choose your parameters and how they will impact the operating point. And I had said that energy consumption rises when you turn things on and off. And on the left-hand side, above, system resuming, okay? System resuming, the system goes at full power consumption until it has resumed. Why is that? Because it's as quickly as possible, it's trying to load everything into memory. Okay? So it's exercising the disks, it's exercising the memory systems, it's exercising the processors through operating systems, and it's running at maximum. And look at this is our measurements, okay, on a given machine. And we see that the energy we've consumed just to resume is the integral of that. Okay, it's the area under that curve, basically. And below, you have system hibernating. So we've put the system to sleep, and we measure the amount of energy consumed just putting things to sleep. Okay, and you have the same thing. Of course, the values are, I mean, the peak values are similar. The time in seconds for hibernating is basically a little bit shorter, I think, or yeah, well, they're actually comparable. But anyway, you can see these things. Then you can look at the impact these things will have on your operating points, on your loads, and so on of the system. So all of this is kind of, I think I'll skip this because I have many more things to say. Now, networks. Okay, this is work we did some years ago, even many years ago, on turning on and off routers, turning routers on and off in a network, right? And how did we turn a router on and off? We didn't actually turn, electrically the router on and off. All we did was to block it from accessing the rest of the nodes. So it's a software blocking of the router, and we are emulating a router being turned off. So what we were interested in is what are the side effects of doing this? Because people say, oh, you can wake up and shut down routers and so on and so forth. It turns out it's a very bad idea to do that. Because what happens is that you have huge perturbations in quality of service, in delays, and you have peaks in load. Up there is delay. The top picture on the left-hand side is what's happening to the delay as you're turning off one router on and off. Okay. The next one is what's happening in loss. Okay. And the only thing that wasn't hurt too much was jitter. So you have delay, loss, and jitter. And we see that the delay and loss are significantly perturbed. And the bad news about loss is that if you lose a packet, if you have TCP running on top, then you're going to retransmit the packet until it works. So you're doubling the amount of energy that you use for that packet, okay? At least doubling. So this doesn't seem, on and off doesn't seem to be the good idea. So we had also measured the power consumption of because if you buy a router, or you just go to the shop that sells routers. I don't know of any shop that sells routers, but suppose you go to a shop that sells routers. What do you see? Look at the back, and they say, this is 1 kilowatt, or this is 10 kilowatts. Okay? That's nominal. That's just there to make sure that if you plug it in somewhere, the whole electricity system will go down. Right? It just warns you about what you should have thought about in terms of power supply. But it doesn't really tell you what happens. This is what tells you what happens. And you have the y-axis is a power consumption, and the x-axis is the traffic it's carrying. Okay? traffic it's carrying in packets per second, and so on. And this is, so we have different data sets. The left-hand one has been averaged a lot. I'll show you some real ones. With real ones, you have a lot of jagged behavior because it's very hard to repeat exactly the data at the points. For instance, this tells you what the actual measurements are. Okay, you have all these jag, and the blue line is just the average value, okay, as a function of load. Now, this tells you there is a nonlinear behavior, right, between load and power consumption. So what we've tried to do is to exploit this through routing, okay, so that as we move traffic around, we minimize the average energy consumption across the network, okay, across the test bed. And this is exactly what we did. This was work with a postdoc, Dr. Mohammadi, who's now at King's College. And what we did was we came up with a routing protocol. And this routing protocol said, if your delay is, if you're measuring a high end-to-end delay within a certain boundary, and I think we call this boundary 70 milliseconds. If you are close to 70 milliseconds end-to-end delay, then use shortest path. Okay? If you are below that, try to use least energy. So what does it mean, try to use least energy? What we simply did, very, very simple thing, was each router, we constantly measured the power consumption. Okay? And what we did was for any path, we summed the power consumption on each of the routers. Okay? So we were not doing, if you wish, shortest path, we were doing shortest energy routing. Okay, very simple idea. Okay? And with this, over the test bed, we were able to reduce by about 30% the energy consumption across the test bed. Okay? And of course, we paid for this in reduced quality of service because a lot of the time, this was pushing the delay to 70 milliseconds. Right? Because it was not choosing the shortest path, it was choosing the one which had the least power consumption accumulated over multiple nodes. All right? So this is another idea that we've worked on, and I think this is also potentially something interesting in many areas. Again, I skip a lot of the things. Okay? I've also been working in recent years on the idea of what I call energy packet networks. What's an energy packet network? We are used to data packet networks. What's an energy packet network? Energy is being conveyed in packetized form. Okay? It's moving across a network in packetized form. Now, has this ever been done? Answer, yes. Today, there is a group in Kyoto who has built, but not for a huge thing, but they built, for instance, computer system chips and boards, okay, where you're switching energy dynamically in packetized quanta. Okay? How do you do that? Voltage is fixed, current is fixed, right? You turn it on for some time, and you have a packet of energy. You turn it on for twice the time, then you have 2 packets of energy that go. At the other end, who collects this? A battery. Okay? So we've been looking at this idea where, if you wish, buffers are batteries. Queues are batteries. And data is replaced by energy. However, we do it in models, in mathematical models, where we have both energy flow and data flow. Okay? So it is networks of queues where there are 2 kinds of customers. Some customers are energy, some customers are data. Okay? And for a server to a service system to operate, you need the arrival of energy and data. If there is just energy, the energy is stored. If there is just data, the data is stored. It's blocked. It can't move forward. When the 2 come together, then the data packet moves forward, and the energy packet is consumed. Okay? So we've looked at this kind of model and using G-network techniques, okay, and some other things. And there are some very interesting results which have been published in the mainstream IEEE journals. For instance, in IEEE Access, we have a paper there. We have a recent paper which has been accepted for IEEE Journal of Systems. What is it called? IEEE Systems Journal. It's going to appear. So we have quite a few, and at conferences, quite a few pieces of work in this general area. Okay, I won't go into the details because I'm jumping all the time from one subject to the other. But we're using conventional methods of queuing theory to develop methods to analyze and optimize systems which use energy to process. Okay, so we can ask, for instance, we can do optimization, including both energy considerations and quality of service considerations, as usual, in a network case. So that's, I'm moving forward. This is from the 2016 paper in IEEE Access. You can find, just look at my name, IEEE Access 2016, and it's there. Okay. Now, we've also done work in the same approach to dealing with, for instance, suppose I have different power consumptions in different routers. How can I dynamically, but theoretically, based on theory, how can I dynamically dispatch jobs so that I will minimize energy consumption and a combination of energy consumption and, for instance, delay? So we've looked at those things, and we published in that area too. Okay, so let me move on. Then it's very interesting because these models of energy and data have led to new analysis results, okay, which have appeared in a number of journals and have given rise to a couple of PhDs and so on. So there are very interesting models which are not conventional queuing models about these kinds of things. So let me move forward. And let me talk now about the last topic I want to talk to you about, communicating with spins. So, is massive reduction possible? Well, if you look at, if you look at a CMOS gate, right? One CMOS gate basically deals with 1 bit. Okay, if it's lucky, it deals with 1 bit. If it's unlucky, it doesn't do anything. But if it's lucky, it deals with 1 bit. And you can do some analysis, and you can see that it's using about 50,000 electrons at least. Okay, so it's doing 1 bit with 50,000 electrons. Now, if you could do spins, you might do this with, I won't say 1 electron, simply because you'd have errors. So you have to take care of that. But you might do it with 1,000. Okay. So what's the possibility and what are the side effects? So I've done work on that in recent years. It's also papers in various venues. This stuff is from an information theory conference and also in the IEEE Transactions on Emerging Topics in Computing. There's a paper there by myself only. Where I've gone through the analysis. Suppose you have a channel, okay, a fairly realistic system where you have multiple receivers, multiple transmitters, okay, so you can have cross-coupling between various quantum channels. What is the error rate you hit, okay, per bit? And what is are there ways to optimize this? So the analysis, let me end up with a picture. Now, what you're seeing here is a lot of the physical effects are included, effect of entanglement. What do I mean by entanglement? Suppose 1 bit is 1 electron and another one are entangled at a source. Okay? They are sent to two different receivers. As they travel through, they may have, or even to the same receiver, one of them may be affected by noise differently than the other one. Okay? If one of them switches, then the other one will switch as well. Okay? So you have a doubling of the effect of error if they're going to different places. If they're going to the same place, you have a neutralization. So there are very interesting effects that you can take into account. Another interesting effect is the effect of spins What do I mean by the effect of spins? All of those of you who have done physics at a certain level know about the spin effect. What's a spin effect? It means that you have a particular particle spin is influenced by the spin of other particles. Okay? So people try, it's like I try to agree with these other guys because they think this way. Okay? So you have, and the spins then can, of course, influence both by stabilizing a system and by creating more errors if a particle comes through this area by accident. So lots of interesting things like that. And let me show you this curve. Well, this kind of curve tells you, gives you, for instance, asymptotic error rates that you can reach as the number of particles per second increases. So you're going to have much higher error rates, switching rates of error rates when you have low flows, and you're going to have much lower error rates at higher flows. So I think I've gone through quite a panorama of results and approaches. And what I'd like to say as I finish, that there are lots of interesting challenges. Okay? Each of the problem areas I've talked about are open in a certain sense. I mean, they all have potential for quite a bit of research. And hopefully they'll all create some research opportunities for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erol, for the presentation. It was very interesting and very inspiring. I think we are running a bit late, but we'll have time for a couple of questions, one or two questions. Any questions? Yeah, please.
My question is about the impact of, for instance, SDN software defined working on energy consumption of rotors or switches, because as I know, rotors can get the rotating tables. Yeah, again, my question is about the impact of SDN technology or other technology on the energy consumption of rotors and switches. As I know that there is a global manager, they should communicate with that. So there is extra energy, I think, for this communication, but it makes the management easier. But about the energy, can it make the, for instance, energy more efficient, do you think, or have you done any work on this? Or
yes, we have. In fact, we have a couple of papers in ICC. It's papers, the authors are Frédéric, François, and myself. You just look at Gelembe, ICC, years 2016, 2017. We have a couple of papers exactly about that issue. And you are right. I mean, the SDN routers themselves are going to have a higher energy consumption because they're going to have more computation. Okay? However, SDN is not something which is real time. In other words, you don't do the modifications in real time. You do them, say, every 30 minutes or something like that. So you're dealing with a slower process. So the energy overhead may be relatively small. On the other hand, you can use SDN to redefine routes so that your energy consumption drops. So that is a trade-off, and that is the kind of thing that's discussed in our papers. And we actually experimented with this.
One more question.
Let me just mention, which I hadn't said, that energy consumption is exacerbated, is increased by attacks. All the attacks have an effect of increasing energy consumption.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is quite linked to the previous one. I think to virtualization technology, which move some network function from hardware to software. Is there any negative impact on energy? Is there positive or negative to move this?
Well, as I said, it's always a compromise. So it's always a compromise. It depends what you do by moving it. Okay? As you add software, you're going to increase energy consumption. There's no way out. Okay? You're going to add cycles and you're going to add energy consumption. If you use that software to do something clever about energy, then you can gain. If you don't, you will lose. For instance, if you use SDN for improving quality of service, I'm pretty sure that you're going to worsen energy consumption in all respects, right? Because you're going to be doing routing based on quality of service, not considering the energy aspects, and you're going to be increasing the computation through the presence of software. Okay? On the other hand, if you use SDN to do energy optimization, then the overhead will be small enough, but the gain could be significant. It depends what you do with it.
Okay, thank you.
He's Turkish, he has a right for it.
You can do me a favor. Sure. Okay, I have a question about 5G
He gets an
networks.
extra bonus.
About 5G networks energy efficiency. From your presentation, we understood that using microcells or picocells by controlling the energy and reducing the interference between actually among the cells, they're both in favor of energy efficiency. But you said that changing the frequencies in the base station increases the energy.
No, I just said that the densification of the network.
Densification of the network.
Densification. So as you increase the number of different base stations, you're going to, and you increase the number of channels per base station.
Oh, I see. Okay.
The risk is to increase significantly energy consumption.
Okay. So, is there any empirical results or?
I'm not familiar with any.
Okay. Thank you.
But that's my hunch.
I see. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. I think we have all questions to Erol, but we have to
Thank you.
stop now. Thanks for all, Erol.
Thank you very much.
We would like to thank you for
Thank you very much, and just thank you. You have been very kind because
Pleasure.
I didn't forget that historical news. I didn't know. Actually, I didn't know. You have been very kind to say that I just forgot.
Well, I'm being polite.
Okay. Then thank you for your presentation, also highlighting some contradiction, because actually among the 5G requirements there is energy consumption, reduction of 90% of energy consumption. I don't know how they will do, because you just said that with software you increase consumption. And one of the keywords of 5G is softwareization. We will see. Okay. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Accept this certificate. And okay.
Just to comment on that aspect of softwareization. For instance, one thing that can happen is that the control plane is moved to the cloud. Right? We could move a lot of the control plane to the cloud. That could potentially reduce energy consumption. Could potentially, if it's done right. Okay, if the cloud is highly optimized. It can also increase it. Because I don't see how you're going to move it to the cloud without doing a lot of duplication. You have to duplicate for reliability purposes. So it's an interesting trade-off. I don't think there's an easy answer. You just have to look at these things will have to be looked at much more carefully. Now, the problem with a lot of new technologies is that they promise the moon. It's going to be faster, it's going to be more beautiful, it's going to be more energy efficient, you're going to love it, it's going to be all red and pink, and so on, right? But then reality is always different. Have you ever seen, with evolutions in ICT technologies, have you ever seen so far a reduction in energy? If this had been the case, we would have seen it in the curve somewhere.
Maybe.
I don't think it's happening. I think it's going the other way. And as you complexify a system, I mean, look at the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was based on replacing human labor by energy and by increasing CO2 impact. This is the problem of the developing countries. Every country which has a developing economy is actually using more and more energy to make life easier for human beings, right? So this has been the trend. Is this going to be very different in 5G? What could be wonderful is if we come back to analog communications. Then I think we would have a lot of analog circuits. Then I think we would really be saving a lot. And then, of course, the computer science departments would close, and the electrical engineering departments would become 5 times bigger.
Okay, thank you very much. I give the floor to Enrico Russo, who is the chairman of the next session, next keynote session.
Okay.
Bien?
I
The
invite
slides
Antonio
are there.
Franchi.
So just anyone who wants the slides is welcome.
Okay, we will.
Antonio Franchi.